Well, good morning, Shabbat Shalom, and Hag Sameach. Really good to have you with us. I'm Rabbi Feinstein from Valley Best Shalom, and this is my dear friend Rabbi Gelman from South Florida. And this is our next year of Torah study, brought to you every Shabbos morning or every Friday afternoon, depending on when you can catch us. And we're delighted because this week is Simchat Torah, the celebration of Torah. And this week we get to roll the Torah back from the very end of Deuteronomy back to the very beginning and start all over again. The tradition likes to point out that the last letter of the Torah is a lamed. The word is Yisrael. And the first word of the Torah is Breshit. The first letter is a bet. And when you put lamed and bet together, you get the word lev, which means heart. This is the heart of the Jewish people. And this wonderful custom of reading Torah every single week, going through it week after week after week, this is the center of our core of our worship, the core of our communal cultural life. So let's begin with that question, Mark. Of all the things that we Jews could do as a marker of our identification, as a marker of our culture, why Torah, and why do we still read it, and why do we read it over and over and over again?
Okay, the biggest question could be the only question. And the answer is the biggest answer, and it could be the only answer. And that is, the only reason to do this is because somehow, some way, it's from God. This is Torah min hashamayim that we're reading. It's not just Torah, which means teaching. It's Torah from the heavens. It means this is Torah, this is our gift, God's gift to us. Now, the question then becomes, how could this ancient collection of books filled with stuff that is deep and profound and loving and inspiring, and also with stuff that's ancient and sexist and misogynistic, how is it that this complicated, variegated collection could be from God? So my answer to that question is that it's like looking at a house on the edge of a clearing that's obscured by some trees. So you know that there's a house behind the trees because you can see the outlines of the house. And you can actually see some of the house. But you can't see the whole house because some of it is obscured with leaves. And so you look and you try to make sense of what the house looks like. And that's exactly what the Torah is to me. The Torah is the house of God. It is God, God's words, communicated obviously to a human being or several human beings. And it contains shapes, which mean messages, words, a way, a path, what the Taoists called the Tao, the way we walk, the code of life. It contains that. And some of it is so clear and so inspiring and so simple and obvious that we know that if we do this and walk this way, our life will lead to flourishing, kindness, graciousness, and closeness to God. Things like, V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. To me, this, which by the way,
love your neighbor as yourself. Love the other as yourself, right?
Right, which by the way, of course, we call the golden rule, and which, when I was writing that book with Tommy, Religion for Dummies, we surveyed all the religions in the world that we could get to, and they all have a version of the golden rule. That they don't all have other stuff in the Torah. There's no sukkahs, there's no esrog in the Hindu Bhagavad Gita, but there is the notion that we should treat others the way we would want to be treated ourselves. It's elemental, and it doesn't even require God. It's what the medievals called natural law. It's obvious that you want to be treated, that you should treat others the way you want them to treat you. And so there is an example, one of many, that are in the Torah, that are part of the house that we can see clearly. The other parts, Adam and Eve are expelled from the garden, and one of the curses on Eve is V'hu yimshal bach, your husband shall rule over you. Okay, that's a natural thing to say 4,000 years ago. It may have been a natural thing to say 100 years ago, but it's not right that a husband should rule over anyone, especially his wife. And I don't, as Martin Buber said, I don't hear God. I don't hear God. I don't see God in that verse, or in the slaughter of the Amalekites, or in the Ben Sora, or the stoning of a disobedient son, or in the taking of a captive slave. There's things that I just can't hear God's voice in. Not to mention the fact that there's parts that are scientifically inaccurate, inappropriate, funny. The notion of the sluice gates of heaven opening up to cause rain, that there's gates up there, and it's blue because that's the color of water, so it opens up and the water comes down. I mean, that's what they knew when they didn't know the water cycle or evaporation. So that's why it's worth struggling with this book, collection of books, because it shows us the shape of God. That's my answer.
So my Orthodox cousin would tell you that the Torah was given by God to Moses on Mount Sinai. Every word of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he really believes that we were passive recipients of divine wisdom, and therefore he would disagree with you. He would appreciate what you said about the divinity in the Torah, but he would disagree with the mixture of other stuff. For him, that stuff also is divine, and he wrestles with it. I argued with him. I said, I have a different vision. I think that God invites us into a conversation, into a dialogue. And what we have in the Torah is the dialogue. That is, our ancestors went looking for the evidence of the divine within the texture of human life. And they found what you said, rules, for example. They found ways of thinking about the world. They found ways of being in the world, which reassured them that there was a God living with them. And that's what they encoded in the language of the Torah. But the language of the Torah, the language they wrote it in, was their language. So Dibrat Torah b'lashon b'nei Adam. Torah, Rabbi Shmuel taught, Torah speaks in the language of humanity. The language of humanity is culturally bound. In the time when the Torah was written, men ruled over their wives. So this was considered culturally bound language. But the Torah has within it that which the divine that our ancestors discovered. And that admixture, that kind of combination, demands of us a very critical reading. So when the great Rashi, the great Torah commentator of the 11th century, opens his Torah commentary, he says from the very first word, the first word of the Torah contains an egregious grammatical error, right? And he says, well, then how do I read it? If I can't even read the first sentence literally, I can't read the first word literally. It says the Torah says darsheni, interpret me. I have to be an active reader. I have to be an interpreter. I have to be a partner with God in continuing the dialogue that my ancestors began in seeking divinity in my own existence. And that's what the Torah invites us to do. And its value is that it has the stuff that our ancestors discovered, that God was saying, that God put into the world for us to discover. And that's what's valuable. What's interesting, of course, is we live in a cultural moment when only the new is valued. Old stuff
Right.
gets tossed away, right? Old stuff gets tossed away, unless it becomes an antique, and then it gets sold for a god-awful price and people value it. And it's always funny when I see antiques that I used to own. Right? I mean, but new stuff, new thing, new wisdom, new ideas, new technology. The new is always valued over the old in our culture. In Jewish culture, the new is valuable, but the idea that the old ones had certain powers of perception and certain depth of wisdom that we don't have is a value. And therefore, we ought to quietly listen to what they have to say. We may not want to accept it all. As you said, the misogyny is horrific. The racism is horrific. The fact that slavery exists in the Bible is horrific. But there's still insights there that can be gained. And that's very, very valuable. And that's why we read it. And that's why we read it over and over again. Because each year you come back to it and you find layers of meaning that you didn't see before. That's how I would answer. That's how I would answer the question.
Yeah. And I think that's a wonderful answer. But both your answer and my answer are what I would call second stage answers. That is, they're answers that come to people who have already decided to be Jewish and want to deepen their Jewish identity. So the way to do that is to study Torah, or a way. That's one of the other several ways. But what about people, and we encounter them now in large numbers, who say, look, I have no desire to deepen my Jewish identity. I don't consider Jews to be more moral than other people. I don't consider Judaism to be more virtuous than other religions. I think all religions are either, if they're a Marxist, the opiate of the masses, or if they're some other point of view, just a kind of delusion, cultural delusion, or if they're eco-obsessed, it's the foundation for our despoilation of the earth. There's lots of reasons that people could say, I'm just a person. I'm happy to be just a person. It's hard enough to be just a person. I don't see what the argument is of why I should be a Jewish person. I know I have a Jewish father, a Jewish mother, or was raised as a Jew, whatever, but it doesn't speak to me. So how do we deal with people who are at the first level, not the second level?
Mm-hmm.
The second level, frankly, Eddie, are easy to deal with. They want to deepen their Jewish identity. They know the Torah, studying Torah is a way, and they come to us to study, and we study. Fertig. Good.
Right.
But what about the great problem of our time?
Right.
Which is the Luftmenschen, the people who are air people.
No, they're not Luftmenschen, by the way. They're quite the contrary. They're more involved. They're people who are satisfied with their lives and find a great deal of comfort, physical and spiritual comfort, in the sort of texture of American life, and they're not looking for anything.
Okay, so here's my answer to first level people. My answer to the first level people are, hey, Schmendrick, where do you think all of this cultural stuff that you're enamored with, this American culture, this whatever it is, where did that come from? Where did the well springs come from that you are drinking water from? Because you have to have an ethical system. You cannot live a life without some ethical system. Well, where did you get this idea that people are holy or that special or that there's a supreme being? Or even if you don't believe in a supreme being, where do you get the idea that you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't murder? Where do you get this? You don't get it from nature. You get it from a tradition that imposed upon nature a moral fabric that changed and created Western civilization.
Mm-hmm.
So what you think you're getting is just watered down Judaism. What you're getting in America is the teachings of people, all of whom were religious, the founders and it says on the Liberty Bell, you say, okay, you're an American, and that's enough for you. It says, proclaim liberty throughout the land to all the inhabitants thereof. That's on the American Liberty Bell. Where do you think that's from? That's from the Torah. It's actually my bar mitzvah Torah portion. So it's Bahar, so it's Leviticus 25. So where do you think all of this comes from? We are part of the fabric of Western civilization, and that fabric is interwoven with truths from the Torah.
Yeah, I appreciate that, obviously. I don't know if I would call the guy a schmendrick, but appreciate
well,
that.
It's a loving insult.
I think what we need to do, first of all, is to listen to these people, honest to God. And you have to listen to what kind of person this is, right? There is a kind of person who is so satisfied in the comforts and joys of their daily living that questions of meaning, of purpose, of spirituality, of ethics don't occur to them. They're just, happy people who are making a living and raising families and enjoying life. They have all the gifts of American prosperity, and they're not seeking anything more. And for them, it's very hard to break through that and say, here is another level of thinking, because they're very happy where they are. There is, however, and then there's a second kind of person who is an ethical atheist, the person who really says, I reject all religion because religion has done bad things to the world and continues to do that. And that person, I agree with that person on many things, because what they're objecting to isn't religion per se, it's bad religion. There's actually an editorial in the Washington Post last week. Very thoughtful woman. She's Jewish. She identifies as Jewish in the very first sentence of the editorial and says, I've given it all up because of the bad things that religion has done to the world. Christopher Hitchens was a very, very famous version of this idea. And for those people, I think that there is an answer, but that's a different quality of person, because that's a person who's very ethically sensitive and who's very committed to a better world. And they just need to, hang on. They just need to find, what they're open to, if we can listen to them, if we can listen and not just try to shut them down, which is what often happens among religious people. But I listen to these people because I respect them. There, I think we have common cause on many aspects of things. And in fact, I detect within their within their atheism a sort of latent religiosity, which I think is very important to point out, right? And I'll describe that in a second. And then there's a third kind of person who is a step above those two. And that person says, look, I'm open to it. I just haven't found a religion that really speaks to me. Because what the stuff you said earlier, Mark, the misogyny, the racism, the chauvinism that I see both in religious texts and religious practice and religious communities, I don't want any of that. I want a religion that really does speak to my ethics, my values, and the way that what I want to see the world. And there too, there's an argument to be made, a distinction to be made between good religion and bad religion, right? Between religion that is intelligent, religion that is ethical, religion that has a humanistic bent to it, and religion which is all those other qualities that we reject. And when you listen to people in this kind of phenomenology, this kind of categories of different kinds of people, I think there are some openings. What I always do is ask a person, very well, I'm not going to try to make you me. I'm not going to try to convince you or convert you or turn you into a religious person you're not. What I'm interested in hearing from you is, what are the sources of meaning in your life? What is this? How you articulate your own sense of larger purposes. I want to hear your values and where those values come from. That gets very close to your argument before, and how those values are bolted into the world through narratives, through examples, through heroes that you embrace. I want to hear more about how you construct meaning in your life. That is an opening to a conversation that can very well lead to a person saying, well, I guess I'm more Jewish than I thought I was.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's wonderful. And it does show one of the many differences between us. I have more of a debater mentality, which is, okay, you're coming at something I love. Please forgive me, but I'm going to defend it with the same rigor and vigor that you've attacked it. So please excuse me, but in my presence, bad arguments are not going to fly. And you, who are just a loving, saintly guy, and you're open to the people in ways that I am not. But let me address the three people and the three groups that you mentioned, because it's a brilliant typology. The first, let's call them the hedonists, the people who are just happy, driving their Bentleys and going out to good restaurants. Okay, so what I say to them about why they need religion, why they need Judaism, is death. Death. That there's going to come a time when they're not going to drive their Bentleys because they're going to be dead. And that reality, that you cannot defeat death, and time has no losses. Time is a victor over all of us. That idea then comes to them through my arguments by saying, do you have any concerns or interest in what happens after you die? Does it affect, because if you think there's nothing after you die, and you see the world so askew morally, why do good things in this world? Or if you think you're going to die, if you know you're going to die, how do you not just wake up completely depressed every day, particularly if you're on, as they say in golf communities, if you're on the back nine of life? Well, how do you right. That's the first thing.
Right. So before you get to the second one. So I don't disagree, by the way. I just, again, would do this in a more gentle way. I have found that you can't get through, even with something as powerful as death, to that kind of person's going to tell you what people conventionally believe. And it's not that they're anti-ethical. They're very ethical people. It's just, they don't think about it. It's a sort of natural ethics. What does happen, though, I think here's where you're absolutely right. That person suffers the loss of a friend, or the loss of a loved one, or a disease, or a setback, or a tragedy. And then I meet those people because they come to see me all the time. And then they say to me, I've never thought about my life in these terms, but this event has really shaken me. And I want to know who I am in the world. I want to know where I am in this world. I want to know what I should be believing in that might help me figure out how to make a life that's worth living, Now that I live in a different world because my friend has passed away, or my loved one is so ill, or I've suffered this catastrophe. It's the inevitable crises of life that seem to shake these people from the security of daily routines that get them to start thinking about the matters that you mentioned.
Okay,
That's a different strategy for dealing with type number one. Go
type
ahead.
number one. But I would just remind you and our mythical interlocutor that an entire religion, a religion which has attracted 1 out of every 3 people on planet Earth, Christianity, is built on Jewish teachings that that death is not the end of us.
Mm-hmm.
We as Jews have forfeited
Yeah.
that jewel
Right.
of belief and hope. And we'll deal with that when
Let's
you and
come
I
at
talk.
you and I are going to meet in 2 weeks.
Yeah,
And
we'll talk about
here
that.
in LA.
But
We're
let's
gonna do
go
the
to
program.
number 2.
Number two is the ethical atheist.
Yeah, okay. So my response to the first group is death. You're going to die in a gentle and loving way.
Right.
You're going to die in a loving way. And the second is soup kitchens. My response to the second group is, okay, you're the ethical one, and you're against all organized religion because they're full of ethical abuses. All right. Let's make a list of the people who have helped the world the most in the last 100 years. Your list, not my list. You make the list. And there's no question that their list is going to include Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King. It's going to include those people.
Right.
And then I'm going to say to them, well, hello, Mr. Ethical, I don't care about organized religion, or Mrs. or ma'am, or they, or it, whatever their thing is. You say, these people that you've listed as the ones who have helped the world are not only religious, they were professionally religious.
Mm-hmm.
And now let's look at the people who have hurt the community you live in the most. The gangbangers, the drug addicts, not the addicts, the pushers, the cartels, the criminal gangs, all of them. Do you think that they go to church on Sunday? Do you think these are people who represent religion? And in your community, when you go to a soup kitchen, who's running that soup kitchen? 99% of the soup kitchens are run by churches or synagogues or religious institutions. There's no atheist soup kitchens. Now, I'm not disputing atheism and I'm not criticizing your life. And I understand there are abuses in organized religion. But let's just get real here. The people who have helped the communities the most in which you live, the communities that are trying to preserve a level of goodness in a world suffused with evil, these are religious people. And they are being castigated because of a few priests who are terrible monsters and abusing children and other things. That's what I say to the second group.
Right. And they're going to answer you. And here's, I don't disagree with you. Again, I just want to phrase it differently. That person's going to say to you, no, it's not the gangbangers that I'm worried about. It's the Supreme Court. It's that, I think, 7 of the 9 members of the United States Supreme Court, the Supreme Court that just canceled Roe v. Wade, were raised and educated in Catholic institutions, right? That the people that pull library books out of my kid's school library because they happen to mention gay children trying to find themselves, or trans kid trying to find themselves, are in fact churchgoers. That in this culture, that person is going to say to us, churchgoers have done a lot of bad damage in this culture. And that's it. I think the answer isn't to say religious people are more moral than irreligious people. I think to introduce the concept of good religion and bad religion, that there's good medicine and bad medicine. What is good medicine and bad medicine? When a doctor does a misdiagnosis or a misprescription, and they give you the wrong drug for the diagnosis, or they have the wrong diagnosis and give you the wrong medicine. Bad medicine can do a tremendous amount of damage.
Yeah, but I have to
But
interrupt here. I have to push back. The fact that there's bad medicine is exactly the right example, because you don't say to somebody, because there's bad medicine, don't go to a doctor.
Well, exactly right. That's exactly my point. Because there's bad medicine, you don't burn down the hospitals.
Well,
right?
that's my
What
point.
you
So
do
we're
is
in agreement.
right.
We're in agreement on one. We're in agreement on two.
No, so
Number
what I would say to the ethical atheist is, I don't disagree with you here, but I think that you've chosen to broad brush all religion with what I think is a misperception of what religion's real duty is. And I'll fully acknowledge that there are an awful lot of religious people that use religion as a weapon to weaponize their own pre-existing prejudices and hatreds. And that, I think, is something we both have to work on. And that I take responsibility for those in my own faith community. I've spoken about this on the pulpit, my own faith community that uses its own prejudices and uses religion as a way to absolutize and then weaponize our own faith. That I fully acknowledge. Now let's take the third one. The third one is the seeker, the person who says, I'm open, talk to me. Tell me what I can find in faith.
I said this actually to Chris Hitchens. I had a chance to talk to him before he died, because talking to him after he died was, in my view, pointless. And that is, I talked to Chris and I said, Chris, it's, you're a brilliant debater, and you've used to great effect one of the oldest debating tricks in the book, which is the straw man. You set up the worst possible description of religion, filled with the worst abusers of religious life, and you say, why would anyone want to be a part of that? But actually, what you've not included is you haven't included Maimonides, you haven't included Augustine, you haven't included the great wisdom teachers of the East. You haven't included the people who are the authors of profound insight, profound wisdom, and deep and abiding gratitude and goodness. And these are people whose traditions come through sacred texts. And these are the people whose writings and whose speeches you should hear and you should read. But the question I asked Chris was, all right, so you've defeated religious people who are caricatures of religion. Congratulations, Chris. Let me ask you, what is the source of your hope? Where does your hope come from? Where does your hope? You have cancer. You're dying of cancer. Where does your hope come from? And there was a long silence. And he said, well, finally, at least, someone asks me a checkmate question. And there it is. When someone is open, you gently ask them, what is the source of your hope? And if they say, well, I don't know where my hope comes from, I'm looking for hope. You say, well, I have a source of hope. I believe when I read that the Lord is my shepherd and I shall lack nothing, that even if I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, God is with me, that I live a life that is in the presence of God, and that it is overlooked. I mean, that it is that I'm being looked over, I'm being attended to, and that after I die, my soul will be brought into the presence of God and of the people I loved who died before me. Those are sources of my hope. And I would remind them that at the end of every prayer, when we say Amen at the end of a prayer, we are not saying emet, which is the Hebrew word for truth. We're not saying what I just said is true, which is what you'd think you should say. You just said a prayer. You made certain assertions, philosophical assertions. You should say at the end, and this is true, emet. But we don't say that. What we say is amen. And amen is from emunah, which means trust. So at the end of a prayer, what we're saying is, I don't know what's true, but what I do know is what I can trust. And what I can trust is this path that has been set out before me by my ancestors, and it is before my feet. And when I walk in the path, I live a more flourishing, grateful, and kindly life.
Right.
And when I don't walk on this path, I feel morally attenuated. I feel morally constricted. So for you, who's looking for hope, I ask you to just say anything that you trust. And let's start building up a list of your amens. What can you say amen to? Say, I trust that it's do something good every day. Amen. Can you believe that? Okay. Say, I trust I should do something good every day. Let's say it together. Amen. I think that I should be grateful for what I receive. Good. Okay. Gratitude. Great. The medieval mystic Meister Eckhart said, if the only prayer we ever say is thank you, it will be enough. Mm-hmm. Okay? So now let's say I received a beautiful, cool breeze on a hot day, and I'm grateful for that breeze. Can we both say amen? Amen. And then I would build up a list of amens, and then I would say, see you in shul.
That's lovely. That's really lovely. I would add I'm not going to disagree at all, by the way, for this one. I would only add one more point, which you didn't get to, which is actually where we started from. And that is to remind the seeker, first of all, to introduce the seeker to a treasury of wisdom that is available within the texts and the rites and the practices of faith, our faith. But to remind the listener, the seeker, that those texts are written in an idiom, a language that is kind of hard to get to. It takes some translation and interpretation to get to those texts, to understand the true depth of those texts. A silly example, if you never read Shakespeare and you heard about this guy Shakespeare who really knows how to write beautiful plays, and you open a Shakespeare play, you'll get through maybe the first paragraph before you'll close it and say, I don't understand a word. Who told me this was written in English? Right? Because Shakespeare writes in a different English. Well, the writers of the Bible, you can read a translated Bible, translated out of Hebrew, but the English isn't going to get you very far because it's written in a different kind of idiom, a different kind of language. And it takes some expertise, some learning, some guidance to know how to open up that language and find the depths that's there, the poetry that is there, the wisdom that is there. It takes some patience because nothing valuable happens all at once. It takes some connoisseurship, some expertise for someone to help you through it and make a suggestion. Read this one, right? And it takes a little bit of effort, some work to say, what can that mean? The Lord is my shepherd. Every word in that sentence is a metaphor. And what is it a metaphor for? What experience does it attach itself to? It's what Abraham Heschel, one of my heroes, called depth theology. that all of religion, each expression of religion, texts and practices, is related to an experience that all of us have. We just have to remember that experience and connect this text with that experience and draw the lessons from the experience. That kind of effort pays off when we gain a sense of, oh my God, now I can see the world through completely different eyes. You've shown me how to see the world through very, very new eyes. And that's the gift that Torah gives us as we begin this reading this new year. So Mark, it's Simchas Torah Saturday night. I want to wish you a Freilach HaSimcha Torah, happy, sweet holiday. And we'll
Thank
begin
you.
the Torah. And next week, you and I get to begin at the very beginning all over again. I'm looking forward to that. So let this be a good week of new beginnings. Take good care.
God bless you, Ed.
Shana Tova to everybody.